Welcome, everybody, to the Inner Carnivore podcast. I have special guest, Coach Stephen Thomas, today. Before I get in it with Stephen, I want to remind everybody, whether you guys are streaming this on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, or watching the full video on YouTube, do a huge favor. Like, subscribe, leave a comment, leave a review for the show. It helps more than you guys know, and every single time you guys do it, it is greatly appreciated. Stephen today, a coach out of the UK, I believe, specializes in obesity, diabetes, is a phlebotomist, an advanced personal trainer, has a bachelor's, honors, tons of experience, and I was on his show a couple weeks ago, and I'm super excited not only to dive into your background and what it is that you do, but you also have a crazy story of yourself. So before we get into it, how are you doing, Stephen?
I'm doing really well. And before we came on, I was just saying I've come off the back of a weekend of the Public Health Collaboration Conference where the mighty Ken Berry gave a very emotive 30-minute speech about the alternative he's setting up to the American Diabetic Association, which really was one of the best speeches I've ever seen. No slides, no facts, just talking from the heart about people that we know that have had diabetes, amputations, maybe even died from complications of diabetes. So that was pretty interesting. And Anthony Chaffee was there. There was the usual suspects, Ben Bickman, Dave Feldman. It was that, which makes me sound like all I cared about was the male speakers, but that's the only ones off the top of my head I can remember. But it was just an amazing event. And that was yesterday. I travelled back. So that was good. Yeah, so I'm good, but a little bit peopled out because it was 48 hours of just talking this stuff all the time, and really nice to have some people that I've helped online or even listeners and viewers that I've never met before come up to me. So it was a really nice weekend, actually, and I learned a lot, so it's good.
That's super awesome. Where was the conference held?
Well, East Croydon, which is a sort of part of London that has seen better days, put it that way. But the Fairfield Halls is a nice venue. Yeah, nice venue.
Okay. I've been to London one time. I was there for a couple days, and then I spent the rest of the time in Ireland. But yeah, I saw the lineup for that conference, and I saw a bunch of pictures, and because I actually have a decent UK follower base. Obviously, it's bigger in the US for me, but the UK is definitely, aside from Canada, is one of my larger demographics. I saw a bunch of people that went to the conference and posted pictures, and you list off the names, and I'm like, I was telling you before, I'm like, this is like a checklist of like people I'm trying to get on the show, which is super cool. And honestly, prior to doing any of this carnivore stuff, prior to getting into it and in with the community, I never was someone that would go to conferences, like ever. It was one of those things that there was nothing that I really cared about enough in order to want to go to a conference like that. But hearing you talk about this and seeing these pictures and all these, these people that I respect and follow quite closely on social media, I'm like, man, I really wish I could go to these conferences. Like next time I'm just going to I got to fly out there or something.
Yeah, and I mean, that's what Ken Berry tapped into, actually, because he literally said, do you know anyone that's got diabetes? Put your hand up. So put your hand up. And it was a lot of delegates. Do you know anyone that's had diabetes and had an amputation? Quite a few hands went up. My stepfather, had that, so I put my hand up. Do you know anyone that's died of diabetic complications? Right, okay. So what if I told you maybe there was an organisation that could have helped them but didn't? And just went down that sort of route of getting a little bit angry, and rightly so. And then told the story of the person that was working at the ADA, and they were told to do a salad with Splenda in, and she refused because she didn't think it was good for diabetics. So she was fired. And then it came out that one of the biggest donors that year was Splenda. And he was saying that, he's going to have the American Diabetic Society online, and they're going to be fully transparent. They're not taking any funding from Big Pharma or Big Food. They're going to publish all the money online so you can see what they're doing. But what it's actually going to do is try and help diabetics, not feather their own nest. So it was... that doesn't want to make you go to a conference and listen to the next speaker. I don't know what would, because if you've lost people, you know, someone that's had an amputation and maybe they could have been helped and that didn't happen, or maybe they've died, but they could have still been on this planet if they had really good advice instead of advice that was profit driven. You know, that's pretty emotive speech, but it's true. I mean, sadly, that is true. And you talked about my story. My story has that in it. I lost my parents when I was very young, and my mother followed the food guidelines pretty much religiously. She really did do things properly. If she was going to do something, maybe that's something I've inherited. So she didn't have any red meat, any saturated fat. She did all the fruit and veg, lots of bran, skim milk, freshly squeezed orange juice, and apparently that's a recipe for not getting colon cancer. So she died of colon cancer. 9-pound cancer growth, no red meat, no saturated fat. So there's your N equals 1. But of course, it isn't an N equals 1, as I've since learned in my profession, doing what I do now. And then, you know, I am Hamlet. My dad died when I was 10, and his brother came over for the funeral. And when he got out of the taxi, he was the spitting image of my father. My mother fell in love straight away because she was lonely and just lost her partner. He did really look like my dad. I was 10 at the time, but yes, he looked like my dad. Makes sense. He was the brother. So that's a genetic tie. People are thinking, well, your stepfather had something. It's nothing to do with your bloodline. Well, it was. If people like coincidences, by the way, he'd left England when he was 15, and we're now talking sort of 45 years later. He gets out of the taxi, comes into the house, and when we get to know him a little bit, this is before there was a romantic connection with my mother, he got his wallet out and showed that his wife, who had died, looked exactly like my mother, which was really quite freaky. And there you go. So the genetics there, maybe there was a little bit of my dad and his brother liked the same sort of looking woman. Anyway, so they married. And then years later, I was at work and called to the reception, and my stepfather was in a diabetic coma. So I rushed out to sort that out, and then he ended up with an amputation. And the things that I know now would have helped. That wouldn't have happened. Not at all. That would not have happened. So that was pretty emotive. And like I say, with my mother getting colon cancer, she shouldn't get colon cancer because she was following the food guidelines. She was eating fruit and veg. She wasn't touching red meat, wasn't eating saturated fat. But there she is. She got it because it was like magic, you know, because none of those substances were anything to do with it. People are thinking maybe she smoked, maybe she drank. No, that's exactly what my life has been: not smoking, not drinking, and following the food guidelines. So if you want me to do that as a nice segue, or if you want to jump in with any questions, feel free to do that. But I'm telling you my story. If you want it, do you want me to carry on?
That's a perfect segue. Yeah, keep going with your story and how you ended up with, you know, the information and the lifestyle that you currently have now.
Cool. Yeah, I didn't want to hijack your show there, but I've done this a few times, so I know how it sort of goes. But anyway, so 23, lost my dad, lost my mum. Actually, you know, lost my stepfather as well. And when my mother was in intensive care therapy, after 11 years in and out of hospital, by the way, I'd met a nurse there, and she was looking after my mother, and we ended up being a bit of an item, and she died of breast cancer. Right. So, again, another person that was following all the food guidelines, because in Britain, actually, a lot of people did, which was really surprising. So I did. I didn't learn my lessons from this at all because I totally believed everything I was being told was good for me. And at this point, I was pretty high-performing athlete, I suppose. I did a bodybuilding show. Before that, I'd been a semi-pro soccer player for a little bit. I'd won a tennis tournament, a singles tennis tournament, which is remarkable because I'm only 5'10", and nowadays I would get nowhere near that title. Anyway, so I was fit, healthy, and eating the food guidelines and thinking everything was going to be hunky-dory, and it wasn't. That's a long story short. As I got older, I realized what I wanted to do in life was to be involved in health and fitness. I became a personal trainer. Then I became an advanced personal trainer. And I know Carnivore JT at the beginning said, "Hey, I've got all these qualifications." Well, that's true. I'm all in, like I said about my mum. I'm all in on everything. So I didn't want to just be a personal trainer. I wanted to be an advanced personal trainer. Did lots of add-ons and courses and stuff like that. Ended up actually coaching someone that got to the Olympics who was a type 1 diabetic, very interesting, and javelin thrower. And that point when that happened, I decided I wanted to be really involved in the science and physiology of diabetes. And it seems to be interesting that all the courses were diabetes and obesity, which I think is an interesting correlation. So anyway, they go together. So I did that and ended up being a specialist practitioner in diabetes and obesity. Now I'm in my 40s by this time, and I'm getting tubbier, and I'm getting fatter and sicker, and I'm having lower left quadrant pain. So I'm having a colonoscopy because it's all genetics, right? It's nothing to do with food. So I'm thinking I'm going to get colon cancer. I'm sitting in the bed after the colonoscopy thinking, wow, people are being told they're getting colon cancer. My number's up. This is it. I'm in my mid-40s. I'm running 10 miles 3 times a week. I'm eating fruit and veg. I'm eating, having skim milk. I'm not eating red meat. I'm not having saturated fat. Wow, genetics is really powerful. This lower left quadrant pain is excruciating. Look at me. I'm just getting fatter. I don't understand. I'm eating all the carbs that I need to do, and I'm not eating any fat. And yet I look atrocious. So this is in my 40s. And then I get the all clear, which is good. No explanation of the pain, of course. And I go back to my studies, and they're talking about dosing for insulin. And this is the light bulb moment, which I should have acted on sooner. And I put my hand up and said, I noticed that every time you talk about dosing with insulin, it's all in relation to carbohydrates. And the more carbohydrates you have, the more insulin you need. Wouldn't it be easier to just reduce the carbohydrates? And that got laughed out of the room because you've got to have carbohydrates. But to me, it makes total sense. And I just went with the crowd, which is sadly what sort of humans do. And I set up my practice, and I started to see real people and have to give them advice which was tied in with my personal training. So I had it all, what I thought, personal training, it's great qualification for obesity and diabetes. I understand the food guidelines, and everybody that saw me didn't get better. This was quite demoralizing. I might have a few sort of little successes because you've got people from doing absolutely nothing and eating terribly. So I might get someone that's lost 5 pounds in 2 months and has reduced their insulin maybe a little bit. But then I'd have some people come in, and I think, wow, I have been a rip-roaring success in this particular case. I can't wait to talk to them. And the first thing that comes out of their mouth is, I did nothing you said. I've gone low carb. Oh, right. But you've lost a ton of weight. You look really great. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And this happened time and time again. I'm glad you're smiling, because at that point, it didn't make me smile. It made me scratch my head because I couldn't believe it. So these are all these little alarm bells. I was also getting a lot of bloods interpreted for me and having doctors' comments that didn't tie up with what I was seeing. So off I went to get another qualification, qualified as a phlebotomist. I could take bloods and work in the NHS. And I did my physiology and health sciences and got more into sort of blood flow and all that, and learnt that even the markers that I was talking about were interpreted, these arbitrary normative values, which aren't optimal health, have no relation to somebody eating low carb or keto. And at that point, carnivore was just not even in my space or in my mind, even though I've subsequently interviewed people that have been carnivore for 40 plus years and 20 plus years and all that sort of stuff. But anyway, at that point, it wasn't in my sphere. So I get to my 50th birthday, and I have a coronary artery calcium scan, and I just got this little feeling that maybe my high carbohydrate intake is going to be problematic. And I spoke to the radiologist and said, I think this is going to be bad. And she looked me up and down. Now, I would say I didn't look as unhealthy as most people at this point because of my incredible amount of personal training and exercise and avoiding drinking and smoking. So I think I looked better than most people of my age. So she said, no, it'd be fine. I said, but no, internally, I think it's going to be bad. And it was. It was a score of 639, which is not great. And the consultant who saw me straight after actually mentioned a chap called Ivor Cummins. Didn't know who that was too well, but I definitely did know the name. So anyway, off I went, and I got to my 50th birthday, and I thought, this low-carb stuff, I think I'm going to give this a try. I'd been watching Dr. Eric Berg and Dr. Ken Berry, and I was pretty convinced, but I was more convinced by the fact I was seeing people coming in and they were looking great. So I went low-carb, and it was brilliant. I lost a ton of weight very easily. I know we haven't got to my carnivore bit, but it made a difference. And my lower left quadrant pain got a lot less. My tubbiness got a lot less. And because I've been doing my bloods, my pre-diabetes got a bit less. And I thought, wow, this is really good. Maybe if I drop carbs a little bit more, I might get even better. And that happened as well. So I did keto for a couple of years, and then I got to 55. And by this time, I'd heard of Sean Baker. I'd never heard of a ribeye at this point. So I found out about ribeyes. What are they? And I did all of that. And it was life-changing. I thought I was going to do a 30-day challenge. So I went carnivore for 30 days. And here I am, my 60th birthday, next week, 5 years carnivore I would be. So it's really easy to remember because it was birthdays I did it. So, and just everything. The lower left quadrant pain, totally gone. No gas, no bloating. Used to have a big stress spot here where it looked like somebody got a strawberry and smacked against my head. Totally went. Athlete's foot, totally went. My vision got better. I used to always wear sunglasses. Always. That sun sensitivity totally went. It's just been a real journey, a real revelation. And of course, I've developed to an online coaching sort of model for 5 years. I've been doing rehab for 15 years. So I've got over 1,000 people now that have given me fantastic testimonials. I've had 150 success story videos and building. So I do about 2 a week if I can. That's how many people have seen resolutions and things. And it's been a game-changing experience for me personally, but for the people that I can help. And it's incredible what it helps. This way of eating helps so many different people. IBS, Crohn's, mental problems, which, anxiety, lack of sleep, thyroid, basically you name it. It seems to help in virtually every single way possible.
I love hearing that, because did you have a doctor's recommendation on what you should eat once they got the calcium score back?
Yeah, at that point I was pretty long in the tooth, and it was like, you can give me that piece of paper that's not being read, because I've researched all this, I've studied this, and I know it's rubbish. But yeah, I can tell. We know what it is. It's the eat well plate. 60% of the plate needs to be carbohydrates, and it's just ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous. But sadly, it's what people are still given. It's not helpful. It doesn't work. It might work short term. If someone comes from a really atrocious lifestyle where they're just not doing anything, and they're eating ultra processed foods and pizzas and KFC and Coca-Cola, the usual suspects. But I would also say lots of bread, lots of potatoes. Then they're going to be better. They are going to be better. So to me, it's just a no-brainer to reduce carbohydrates. And if someone's really reluctant, I say, well, look, let's just get rid of bread and potatoes. Just get those out of your diet and see if that makes you feel better. And if that makes you feel better, then we can talk. And of course, if they do it, it makes them feel better. Simple. And
almost
take it from there,
exclusively, right? Like,
yeah,
everybody.
Yeah. Yes.
And the biggest knock is exactly what you just said. I hear people over and over and over and over again. The only reason you feel better on carnivore is because your diet was bad before and you stopped eating all these ultra processed foods. And I'm like, okay, that is true for some people, right? Like you said, you follow the government guidelines and just remove ultra processed foods, you're probably going to feel better if you have a very poor diet. But so many people in the carnivore space, so many people were found carnivore because they were doing everything else that you were supposed to be doing right and didn't get better. Which is why so many people come from vegan, like, and not like dirty processed vegan, like strict vegan
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
or strict, the government recommendations like you were doing or I did. I
Mediterranean
came
diet.
from, what do you say?
Doing the Mediterranean diet. They do that, but it doesn't work for them.
Yeah.
I had
And
one
it's
today.
so many of these people.
Yeah. She said, "What do you think's
Tell me about
holding me
this.
up?" Well, just the same thing. Conventional wisdom, really eating healthily, in inverted commas, nuts and seeds. Right, why are you eating the nuts and seeds? Well, they're fresh, they're healthy. My diabetes is not going. Why is my diabetes not going? I'm eating this. So yeah, you're eating grains, you're eating carbohydrates. Well, no, these are nuts and seeds. These are not carbohydrates. It's not sugar, is it? I was like, yeah, it is. Right. Well, what happened today was 2 weeks after stopping those, the incredible difference in her blood glucose is amazing. She can't believe it. Can't believe it. Sorry to interrupt you there, but that's what continual glucose monitors do. You wear it, and everything you've been told, you don't have to listen to because your body tells you. That banana is quite bad, isn't it? Well, that cereal is quite bad. It does spike my blood glucose. Wow, who'd have thought? I was listening to that. I'm hard of hearing, by the way. That deaf guy, that old deaf guy, he was saying all this. It was true. He wasn't just going on. These foods are bad for me, and it's a no-brainer, isn't it? It really is a no-brainer. If your blood glucose is spiking after eating, you call it oatmeal, or porridge, we call it here. Have your toast, even though it's always brown bread, though. That's got to be good. Why is that toast spiking it? And what's this? Well, I put some honey on. It's even worse. Honey's natural, isn't it? No, but it's a natural sugar. That's surely all right. Well, I don't think it is. I think it's the same molecular structure as crap sugar because there's no difference. Sugar is sugar. It's the same. So I think that that argument doesn't hold water, does it? Because we have people that have come from all types of diets, bad, not so bad, vegan, raw vegan, whole foods, animal based, the whole thing. And it hasn't worked for them.
Yeah, it's super funny that you bring that up. Literally this morning, this morning my time, I posted a video about a doctor who was talking about diabetes, and he's like, people will tell you for your diabetes to cut out sugar. He's like, all you're doing is starving yourself of sugar, which is a vital nutrient, so it doesn't show up on your blood tests. I'm like, okay. And then he's like, now I'm not saying processed sugars are good. I'm saying you need to eat healthy sugars. And I literally exactly what you just did. On my screen, I go, here's the molecular formula for sugar found in processed foods. Here's the molecular formula for sugar found in fruits. One is healthy, one is unhealthy. And you're like, you can't tell me you don't know this. And this is actually, I got to read this because Dr. Bickman, who we were just saying, commented, and he goes, one of the more amusing things for me is to ask a congenitally trained and dogmatic clinician the following. Which nutrient appears most problematic in the blood of the patient when it comes to diabetes? Do you worry about the patient's triglycerides or fatty acids? Do you worry about the patient's amino acid levels? Or do you worry about glucose? Of course, the answer is glucose. Then why give me more of the very nutrient that they're having trouble clearing?
Yeah, exactly. And that goes back to my experience in the classroom. Why not just lower carbohydrates? That's the problem. Yes.
If that's what's causing it, then why? And people will say that. This is the worst part. I will read people online and they're like, you're just masking the problem. I'm like, no, I'm removing the problem. Like, if that's my problem, I have a fundamental issue with clearing carbohydrates. Why would I inundate my body with more of them? That's like saying I'm, borderline, if I'm pre-diabetic, right? I'm borderline lactose intolerant. I have a sensitivity, lactose sensitive. So I just drink absurd amount of milk to overcome that.
Yeah.
That doesn't make sense to me.
Makes no sense. Well, it doesn't make sense. And it makes sense what we're saying. If you have a problem with your metabolism or metabolizing carbohydrates, then don't eat them. And those that say, well, you need carbohydrates, yep, you do, but you don't need dietary carbohydrates. If you need glucose, your body makes it. And not only does it makes it exactly what is needed. So it's not pushing your blood glucose up beyond a toxic level. It's doing the demand-driven manufacture. And I think I might have spoken to you about one of your videos that I saw where the guy had a plate with the amount of sugar in bread, and he was waving this bit of bread around because I think it was 2 tablespoons, and it lacked all that context because that 2 tablespoons of sugar is more than enough to be toxic for 5.5 liters of blood. He needed to actually add context. By the way, here's a human body, or here's a box of blood, 5.5 liters. And do you know what little amount of sugar is needed? Well, it's 1 teaspoon. It's half what's in that 1 slice of bread. Half. Well, then that destroys that argument straight away. So what you're saying, this lovely slice of bread, which you think is good actually, is going to double the level of blood glucose, just that 1 slice of bread. Because that's what people do. They eat 1 slice of bread. They don't eat anything else with it. It's just 1 slice of bread. It's never 2. Of course not. So just that 1 slice of bread will double my blood glucose. Well, actually, it won't even double it. It will be 3 times because you've already got a teaspoon. So you're now adding 2 teaspoons. But if you have a sandwich, you're adding 4 teaspoons. Or when you have something in between the sandwich, maybe some jam or honey, because honey's natural. So now you've got 9 teaspoons of sugar in there and a little bit of fructose as well to make it, even greater. Of course, that won't show up in your CGM, the fructose. So we don't worry about that because it's a fructose monitor, isn't it? No, of course it's not. It's a glucose monitor. So you've got this glucose monitor. It's going to look at this wonderful bit of bread and this other wonderful bit of bread and this wonder substance called honey, and your blood glucose is going to go through the roof. Great. But don't worry, because 2 hours later it's going to plummet. And not only will it plummet, it will actually probably go into a trough and you'll feel hungry again. But do the same thing. Just rinse and repeat. Why not do that? And then you end up with this lovely profile where you're eating all the time. And then you're hungry and you're eating, and you're hungry and eating, and you're just getting all these wonderful blood glucose spikes. It's like a roller coaster. And so this toxic level, you're not doing once, you're doing like 4 times a day. Total sense. It's just ridiculous. You take all these stupid people on Instagram, and 5 years ago I wasn't like this. I was actually live and let live, but they are stupid and they're killing people. And they're making terrible decisions for people and trying to justify it. And just because they got doctor in front of their name doesn't mean they're a medical doctor. Dr. Allo is a osteopath, I think. It's crazy. And it's misinformation that's dangerous to people. It's just ridiculous. Absolutely. And there's no common sense. There's absolutely zero common sense. And then you get the idiots that talk about moderation. So I'm going to say to an alcoholic, just moderate that whiskey, okay? Don't have it every day, just have it at the weekend. Sure, you can do that. It's not addictive, is it? Don't think it is. Oh, or what about someone smoking cigarettes? Don't do that for 6 days. Do it on the 7th. Go on Sunday, just celebrate. Don't worry about it. Just moderation in everything. As soon as you take out alcohol and cigarettes, because you're laughing because it's so ridiculous, well, okay, donuts. All right, don't have donuts for 6 days of the week, but have a ton of them on Sunday. That doesn't happen because people are addicted to sugar. I mean, that's even known. Even the people that talk about high carb, they can't be so in an echo chamber that they don't know sugar is addictive. Because I think pretty much everyone knows that. I know the cigarette companies because they used to spray tobacco leaves with sugar to make them more addictive. So I think
you'd be surprised the number of people fight me over and over and over again about sugar not being addictive. And their justification is if it was addictive, you would run to a bag of sugar and eat it straight out of the bag. okay, that's ridiculous. But yeah, so like to your point, the
Well, no, can I just answer
you get
that? Well, you don't see smokers running to tobacco leaves. They don't eat them raw. You don't get people that
yeah,
are
you don't,
alcoholics going and eating juniper berries. you know,
or they don't go and rub and grab the rubbing alcohol or the ethanol to drink it. Like it's the
I've
most
never heard that
ridiculous
argument.
argument ever.
Yeah, yeah, it is.
I use that
It's
one all the time.
ridiculous.
And
But the other
the
the other thing
moderation
is,
one,
yeah, why would you need to go for a bag of sugar? Because you've got it in your food anyway. You're eating it. So you don't need to, because you are doing that every 6 times a day. You're having something sugary. So you don't need to go and grab a bag of sugar because you're getting your virtual bag of sugar in all the stupid, idiotic stuff you're stuffing into your face. Anyway, don't want to get too cross.
no,
But it is ridiculous.
it's true. And I had, I used the argument, okay, I'm just gonna the moderation one, right? I'm gonna go bust into an Alcoholic Anonymous meeting and say, hey guys, replace your fifths with little travel size bottles. You guys are fine. Like just drink these and there's no problem. Because that's what people will do. They'll get on there and they'll posture and go, there's people walking around the supermarket that tell you not to eat this stuff because it's going to kill you or it's inflammatory. This is the latest one that I'm seeing from the doctors on the other side. If anybody tells you a food is inflammatory, tell them what inflammatory markers it actually affects and what's the quantity needed. And here's my response. So I did my 4K SAD experiment, right? My hands blew up. I don't know if you saw any of those pictures. I'm going to do another like before and after. My eczema went crazy and it was miserable. Like I literally had, open blisters on the backs of my hands, oozing edema. Like just, it was terrible. And 1,000% caused by the food I was eating, right? Like if I can go 4 weeks prior eating very strictly and have no problems, and then the only thing that changes is the food I'm eating, and after about a week I start to have this problem, guess what? So I'm like, here it is. This is the food. That's an inflammatory marker right there. Here you go. Inflammatory marker, my hands. And you know what? Now that I'm back on carnivore, I don't want to eat that stuff. I still have a little bit, right? Like I still deal with the struggles like everybody else. Like, oh man, like I could go for some chips right now. Or you know what? I could crush a cake right now. And I know in my head, I know that if I do that one night, I will have no problems. My hands will be fine. I'm going to wake up fine. I've done it before. It's not a problem. But I don't want to. Like I'm sitting here thinking, I don't want to find what the maximum I can have and then just stay under it. Right? Next time you see a corner, hey, so what exactly was the dosage that this guy overdosed with? Because I want to make sure I stay just under that. Like, where are we at here?
It's crazy. It is.
Yeah, it really is. So, like, pivoting from that, where do most people who find you come from? Like, what are the issues that they're trying to deal with, and the information that they are trying to get past? Because in my experience, people are like confused and they're like, I'm trying to do this and it's really hard for me to wrap my head around eating all of this stuff I've been told not to, and I'm going to get healthier and not just die like everybody tells me I'm going to.
Well, I think it is sort of multifactorial where people come from, because I think because of the things I talk about regarding, say, blood tests, for instance, and how we need to reframe everything, how we look at normative ranges not being optimal ranges, and how they don't cater for people eating this way because the way we eat will impact different results in different ways. For instance, the EGFR, estimated glomerular filtration rate of kidneys, because it's a calculation based on urea and creatinine, which are waste products of protein metabolism, you get this disproportionate EGFR, because the calculation is based on these markers, which when you eat more protein, they go up. And therefore, it looks like your filtration rate has gone down. There is a way around this where you do the proper test, which is a cystatin C, and that will give you a better example of your filtration rate. So I get that. I mean, I had somebody that was literally on the list for dialysis or transplant because of the EGFR was so low, because they were eating higher amounts of protein. And I've got the success story and her thank you note, because I said, well, why don't you get a cystatin C test? Because you have no clinical presentation of any problems whatsoever. In fact, every other marker, visually, your own health, your sleep, your energy, your body composition are all great. So she had the cystatin C test, and the doctor was like, I don't really understand, but yeah, everything's fine. Forget what I said about your kidney being a problem. And when you talk about that, you put a success story out there and you explain it, which I do. I tend to, I'm doing a real snippet here and probably not giving you enough information, but when you explain why does that marker go the wrong way, big one I do, obviously, because of the obesity and diabetes, is why the HbA1c can be very misleading and how you can prove that it is misleading. People love that, because what they'll say is, I saw you did a video about the HbA1c and how it's a bit misleading. Can you explain? I watched the video, but can you explain what's happened to me? Because I'm not eating any carbohydrates, and it's gone up. And I say, well, what does your CGM say? So if they're wearing a CGM, obviously. Oh, well, my average is pretty low. So every single day, measuring your, although it isn't the blood glucose, it's a sort of proxy marker, the interstitial fluids there, but it's calibrated that way. The average is great. I said, do you ever sort of calibrate your CGM with finger pricking? Oh, yeah, I do that because I always want to make sure. So my actual blood, the blood glucose from my actual blood, every time I do it, that's fine. Okay, have you got any bloods that you've done apart from the HbA1c? Oh, yeah, I've done my fasted glucose. That looks great. What about C-peptide? Yeah, that's really good. Have you got low insulin? Yeah, that's great. Okay, and then I just explain. Look, when I did phlebotomy, one of the things that I was told is if someone's hemolytic anemic, which means their red blood cells die really young, too early, they don't last like 90 days, they're going to get a false HbA1c reading because it's going to be really low, because the red blood cells are not in the bloodstream long enough to give you a high reading of HbA1c. Well, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to think, well, if there's a thing out there that can make a really artificially low HbA1c and you're getting this artificially high HbA1c, what could that be? Well, it's got to be the red blood cells living longer. And you can prove that with a reticulocyte count, which looks at the production of red blood cells from the marrow. And that throws out the calculation. And that's the little e in front of the GFR is an estimation of what, the HbA1c is a calculation. And that is the issue. It's a calculation, assuming the red blood cells last X amount of days. Well, if they last a bit longer, you're going to get a fake HbA1c, because all the other markers are great. And so I explain that sort of thing. So I get people, did you follow that? Sorry, JT, was that clear enough?
That's fascinating.
Sorry.
I love hearing that because,
And but there's also the other thing is the sort of moment where you go, oh, that's common sense. People say, well, sometimes my blood glucose does actually go up. All the other things are fine, but I don't really understand because I'm eating this way. So then I explain, well, look, let's have a look at what's going on. You've got low insulin. Is that right? He's like, yeah, I've got low insulin. Right, okay. So cells want to bring glucose in to a certain amount. And they can do that without insulin. It's like a passive diffusion depending on the concentration, because it's really slow. It's really, really slow. So you have these receptors that speed up when insulin is involved, and it speeds up the flow of glucose going in. All right. So what happens? The blood glucose goes a bit lower because you've got insulin. Right, now, we're in a low insulin state. So all you've done is you've just taken the accelerator off a little bit. So your blood glucose just gone up a little bit because you haven't got all the insulin speeding up the entry of glucose into the cells. That's it. Simple as that. There's nothing wrong. So you've gone from 80 to maybe 90 Is that a big problem? Because going back to the spikes, it's the spikes the problem. They rarely say, well, it's gone up to 190. That doesn't happen. They're saying, oh, I used to like it when it was 80, 85. Now it's 100. I'm a bit worried. I'm like, well, you've been doing this a few years now. Your insulin's a bit lower. The other thing is, what are they looking at? What's the reference? Why is 80 good? Because I don't think we adapt to carnivore. I think we adapt to the wrong way of eating. We're now where we should be. Maybe these numbers are where we should be. When you've been 5 years carnivore and you've had low levels of insulin, obviously we still need carbohydrate, glucose in our blood. That's we need about a teaspoon, as I said earlier. So maybe 100 is actually where we should be. It's an arbitrary thing. This 80 is great, 100 is bad, because that's going back to the normative ranges and assuming that all these numbers make sense. Well, they don't make sense because they're all based on people eating 60% carbohydrates, and most of them are not very well. So why do I want ranges like that? So that's the other thing. I try to get people to sort of open their mind up to what they're being said might not necessarily be true, and how they look, how they feel, how they operate, energy. Do they get dizzy? Do they get pains? Well, if you're not getting any of those things, what's the problem? And normally they're like, yeah, but I feel amazing. I'm saying, so why are you worried about this one thing that's gone up? Which I can explain to you is because you had that lower insulin. Why are you worried? It's not going through the roof, and you're just going to get better. And I think that's where I pick up a lot of stuff, because I do sort of explain things that maybe is so obvious people haven't explained it. Because I see that question going around a lot. My HbA1c's gone up, but I'm not eating carbs. Right, okay, well, it's a calculation based on how long your red blood cells last. Yours are lasting longer. Simple as that. As long as all those other markers are fine, you haven't got a problem. My blood's gone from 80 to 90. I don't understand. I'm not eating carbs. Yeah, well, you're not producing as much insulin, so we're not accelerating glucose into the cells. Simple. So I think I pick up that because I've got the personal training and quite a high level in that. People come to me for a bit of exercise advice, which is obviously really good. And I think just generally having a good track record, a lot of good reviews, good success stories. I reluctantly offered a meal plan recently because I do think we can be intuitive with the amount we eat. I think we can all eyeball it and know what we need and listen to our hunger signals. But I think I've now realised that so many people are disconnected from actually how we should be eating for so long. They've literally forgotten how to judge what to eat. I mean, animals in the wild don't have a problem. And yes, there's sort of environmental impacts that affect that, because if you've got a fat lion, then, they're going to die because they can't catch anything, and eventually they're going to be too skinny, so they haven't got it quite right. So there are no fat lions. And if you've got a gazelle that's, eaten too much, they're going to be lunch. So there's that. Yeah, so I get all that. But, animals, I've got a raw fed carnivore dog, and he's not like other dogs. You put a plate of food down, he doesn't rush to it. He doesn't go, he doesn't woof it down. And if he doesn't fancy it, he won't eat it, and he'll just come back to it when he's hungry. And he won't eat it all. If he does eat it all, then we put a bit more out for him. So, and he's the fittest, most energetic dog you'll ever see, with the most beautiful temperament. Doesn't smell like dog smell. He hasn't got a dog smell. He just is fantastic. So I think that's it. I mean, like I say, just going back to the meal plan, people say, I want to weigh X amount and I want to count my macros. I'm like, oh, okay, well, let's give you some guidance for a couple of weeks. Hopefully, once that's happened, you'll know what to do. You've got to start trusting yourself. And I get remarks that I don't think many coaches get, where, someone will message me and say, do you know, for the first time in my life, I actually understand what feeling full is. I feel I've got satiety. I don't really understand it. I just stopped. This never happens. I'm like, well, when you eat this way, the proper human diet, as Ken Berry calls it, which I think is a name hopefully everyone will adopt, because it's just perfect. It is the proper human diet. It's not anything else. It's not really a carnivore diet. It's not really that. It's how we should be eating. Everything else is the weird thing. The Pop-Tarts, that's weird. Cereal every morning. And that's the other thing. People talk about, oh, well, you don't get much variety. Well, you're going to eat cereal tonight or tomorrow in the morning and have some toast. That's what you're going to eat, or potatoes. You can have some rice and you can have some pasta. Tell me about variety. They don't have variety. I have more variety eating this way. And that maybe the last thing I wanted to mention is because I'm not a zero tolerance guy. If you want to do this and you want to eat duck and you want to eat chicken and you want to eat, loads of fish, then this way is good. If it works for you and you thrive, you can do it that way as well. So I think from my website, from my app, from the live streams I do, I just pick up people that quite like what I'm doing, just trying to be very basic. Yeah, I know the science and I can do that. I can put a study up. I can go through it. But other people do that. So I just try to make it layman's and easy to understand and as painless as possible to transition from a different way of eating that isn't really working to one that I feel pretty confident is going to fix most things.
That's awesome. I love the explanation about the blood glucose, because I knew that about cholesterol, right? LDL is a calculation. It's not actually measured in most lipid panel tests. I did not know that about the A1C, which is fantastic. And that makes sense, because my A1C is good. It's really good, but it's higher than I would expect given my glucose. That I don't have a continuous, but I keep track of it, and it's always, usually in the low 80s, maybe the high 70s, and I have low insulin. And so when I got my A1C back, I was like, it's fine. Like, any doctor would look at it and be like, hey, it's good. But I'm like, man, an A1C in the fives. I'm like, that feels a little high for me, but okay, that's fine. So that, like, the calculations and all that makes a ton of sense. I'm very fascinated by this. I love this kind of stuff.
Get the reticulocyte count and prove that your red blood cells are lasting a bit longer. That's it. Sorted. Finished. You can prove it. You can prove that's what it is. That's the test.
I am going to look into that. So I highly recommend everybody give Stephen a follow. He has a lot of great content like this. Where can people find you, your website, social media, coaching, all of that jazz?
Okay, well, on the bloods, don't forget also the glomerular filtration rate, the GFR. That's estimated as well. So anyway, right. The website is the UKCarnivore.com. I have an app called the Carnivore Experience, which you can get from, Apple and Google, these wonderful companies that look after you and love you. I also do a YouTube channel. You can look at Coach Stephen, and you will find there's about 22,500 subscribers at the moment. So I'd like that number to go up. Plenty of videos there. Some have had over 250,000 views because they're success stories that just resonate with people. So yeah, that's probably that. And the UK Carnivore on Instagram. I am on X as well, but I'm not particularly big on there. I'd like to have more followers, but I quite like the followers I've got because they're very active. They all comment, and I feel like it's a nice, quite sort of tight community. I do have books. I've got books on Amazon and on Apple. I have a book called The Guide to Blood Tests in the Context of Keto, Carnivore, and Low Carb, which explains all the things I just said in great detail. We have an accompanying PDF with all the references, talk about other things as well, liver health. So yeah, you can find me anywhere really. You'll get annoyed seeing me once you start looking me up. Yeah, and the other thing that I'm really excited about, is last year I was the first person with my co-host Richard Smith to do a 24-hour live stream all about carnivore. So we just basically had Sean Baker, we had Dr. Chafee, Dr. Kiltz, Lisa Wilderman. We had just tons and tons of Lily Kane, loads of influencers that you would have heard of, just hour after hour, just coming on, Philippa Vardia, just loads. Coming on and talking about carnivore or keto, because that was okay. We had endurance athletes and all that, but it was 24 hours. I stood here for 24 hours and just had guests like Carnivore JT coming up, and we just did it. It was world's first. So anyway, on the 7th of July of this year, we're doing it again because we're idiots. Both Richard and I decided to do this. We didn't eat, by the way, because we both agreed we couldn't have done this when we were high carb athletes, but when you're carnivore, You can do anything. So we didn't eat. We just got up and we did it for 24 hours. Same names we just told you about. They're coming back. There's a few other big names that we haven't released yet. And it's going to be a great event. So that's going to be sort of on my YouTube channel, on Richard Smith, the Keto Pros YouTube channel. And you're just going to see guest after guest after guest. And you can submit questions. So that's the 7th of July. And it's the Carnivore-a-thon.
That's awesome. Everybody definitely go check that out. I think that's the first time I ever saw any of your content. And so I was like, what is this 24-hour thing? And I wasn't able to tune into a bunch of it, but I can tell you the list of guests that you had last time was impressive. So I would highly recommend everybody go check that out.
Thank you. Thank you for that.
Well, I really appreciate you being on. Everybody go check out his stuff. Appreciate everybody who tuned in, and we'll see you guys next time.